Hi everybody, Dustyn Saint here from Primary Care Pathways. We're just about ready, I think, to kick off today's meeting. Hopefully everybody's here for the right meeting. We're doing complex concepts and using protocols and templates today. I've got with me Jez McCole.
Hi everybody.
And we're going to run through, hopefully, a fairly useful session for people in terms of using more complicated tools within EMIS Web. You can use Teams to ask questions. So if you've got a question, on the bottom right hand corner, you should have ask a question. If you click on that purple button, that should take you through to a box that looks a bit like this. I was logged in as Donald Duck and I was asking how to get to the duck pond. In order to answer that question, in order to send that question, I just click on the send here, and then that will come through to us. We'll then approve it, and then it will come through as a question on the webinar. If you've lost the Q&A, if you click on the purple little speech bubble with a question in the top right-hand corner, and that should get you it back. And this is today's agenda. So this is a disclaimer and health warning first and foremost. This is an advanced meeting. And it's a bit of a health warning. It's for advanced users who already have a good understanding of concepts, protocols and templates. And we started to touch on some of the more basic stuff in our last webinar, and had an awful lot of requests for the more complicated stuff, which we're probably better known for. And so that's why we're doing today's webinar. If you're interested in the more simple stuff, if you're just getting out and just getting started with protocols, you may want to stay for the first bit so that we can show you some of the stuff that the cool stuff that you can do with them. But we're going to be getting into some fairly detailed, fairly complex stuff today, so it may not be for you if you're not kind of very familiar with concepts, protocols and templates. So we thought, first off, Jez, we'd just do a bit of a kind of what you can do if you spend the time demonstration. So I'm just going to swap over to my EMIS. So is that, let me just check, that doesn't seem to be showing up. So let me just pull my PowerPoint from there. There we go. And I'm going to go back over to there and then just share that. So I seem to be showing all three screens there, don't I, Jess?
All three of them on there, mate, yeah.
I'm going to just come off there. I'm going to try and reshare, and we'll just try and reshare screen one. So if you give me 2 seconds to get that up and running, it's good that as an IT company, be so on top of this technology, Jess. So what I'm going to do is just show you some of the stuff that you can do if you've got a really firm grasp of some of these tools. So we're going to be talking today about using concepts within protocols and also within templates. So as an example of some of this stuff, I'm just going to show you some of the primary care pathways tools that can be quite useful. So if we're looking at our one results, this tells me, just by hovering over this information, all of the information that I need to know about this person's blood monitoring. So if I'm going through meds management and I'm looking at this person's drugs and I'm thinking, when do they last have all their blood tests done, and how often do they need them, because which drugs are they on, this kind of information I can just hover over my one results and it shows me, look, they need a full blood count done. It's never been done before. It needs doing every 2 months, and it needs doing because they're on these drugs, and it gives me some really detailed information. So if I'm doing meds management, instead of having to go into investigations, instead of having to go into problems, instead of having to go into various different screens which each pause for a second or two, actually I can just hover over that information and it tells me that kind of stuff. Another example, if I want to look at some monitoring information, I want to see when the last blood pressure was done or the last smoking status was recorded, or if they've got any outstanding disease reviews, again I can just hover over the one monitoring and that tells me that information. All of these things are all driven by the kind of things that we're going to show you during this webinar. So it's just a kind of a feel for what can be done if you want to do it. Other things like screening that's overdue. So if you've got bowel cancer screening, abdominal aortic aneurysm screening, all of those kind of things that can be shown. Right through to much more complicated stuff. This is one of Jez's babies, looking at a high anticholinergic burden score. So this chap's got a high anticholinergic burden score of 8. If I double click on that, it will take me through to I'll just go away with that, and the next one, and you can see this takes me through to a template which is calculating the anticholinergic burden score of 8 for this patient, and it's also telling me which drugs are causing that anticholinergic burden. So I can see amitriptyline and oxybutynin are giving me a score of 3 each, and then I've got prednisolone and I've got warfarin that are giving me scores of 1 each as well.
Okay, I think we might have a bit of an audio problem there. Could you just say those last couple of sentences again?
Yeah. So is the audio not working, Jez?
It's a bit robotic. I'm not sure if it's a connection issue or.
Okay, right.
Oh, it's back again. Okay.
Back again. Okay. So I'm just going through the high anticholinergic burden score, and it's just showing up that you've got the score of 8. So if I click on this, it will tell me that the score's 8, and the scores, because I'm getting 3 each for amitriptyline and oxybutynin, and then 1 each for prednisolone and warfarin. Is that better, Jez? Can you hear me all right with that?
Yeah, that's all good. And worth saying that each and every one of those elements is driven by at least one concept. And some of those concepts are in themselves built on a stack of other concepts. So it is all about the concepts, tools like that.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of the other tools that we've got here as well. So you've got things like steroids and low bone protection. You've got things like previous exception reporting, and a whole load of our kind of we've loaded up Donald with pretty much all of the conditions that you can have, so that we can test out all of our stuff on it. But this kind of gives you an idea of the kind of complexity and power of the stuff that you can start to build. This one's a really useful one. So this patient's had a recent urinary tract infection. So if you're in PATH and you see your meds manager and you see your MSU come back and you think, hang on a minute, have they had antibiotics? Haven't they had antibiotics? You just see this alert in the bottom right hand corner, hover over it. They prescribed nitrofurantoin on the 8th of April, so without having to go into the rest of the system, you can see whether they've been treated, what they've been treated for, with even, and make sure that the sensitivities are correct. So it's quite useful from that kind of point of view. So we're just going to dive back over.
Dustyn, I'm aware that the questions facility on this particular webinar may not be delivering anything at the moment. And of course, we can't hear if anybody has got any questions over the audio. So can I make a suggestion, guys? Anyone who's out there, that if you feel that you've not been able to get through to us as we're talking, that you head over to the Facebook group for our Primary Care Pathways chat, and pop your comments or questions on the comments section of the advert for today's chat.
Well, the other thing is, if you're not on Facebook and if you want to send it to us on Twitter, well, Twitter was Primary Care IT on Twitter. So if you just tweet us any questions that you've got, and we'll try and pick them up from there as well. Or if you want to email the team at primarycareit.co.uk. Again, if you send any questions through there, then we'll try and get back to you about those as well. So I'm sorry, the chat doesn't seem to be working today, Jez, does it?
No, I don't think so, but there's a couple of ways you can nudge us as we go. I'll keep an eye on the Facebook group, so do put your questions there as well as Twitter. I'll monitor those.
Bro. Perfect. So we kind of covered what you can do if you spend the time, and then we're going to look at the tools that you've got at your disposal. So what we're going to cover with this is concept outputs. So by that I mean custom outputs from concepts and what you can achieve with those. I was going to do a brief kind of overview about the outputs that you can get from wiggly brackets, because that's quite important for you to be able to know how to build out some of the stuff that you're going to be thinking about constructing. And then vital to that is where the wiggly brackets work. So we're going to run through that. We'll come back to that in a second. How to get the information out there. So thinking about triggers for protocols and protocol alerts, and then embedded library items in protocol alerts. So that was an example of that, is the anticholinergic burden calculator that we just showed you. So you've got a protocol alert protocol that shows you the information, but you double click on it and it takes you to a library item that's then got further embedded concepts within it, which then give you even more information. We're going to talk through how to plan out a piece of work, and then we thought the best way of doing some of this stuff and showing you some of how to build out some of this stuff would be to work through a worked example. And we were really impressed with the EMIS protocol that calculates your weight in pounds and stone for people, and also calculates the BMI, and then gives you a whole load of other information about weight loss or weight gain. And we thought this was a really good example to kind of show you how you might want to think about constructing that protocol, but then also how you might want to build it out and the kind of things that you need to take into consideration. So I'm just going to come out of that and take us back to EMIS, and we'll start off with looking at concept output. So I'm going to go into concepts, and I'm going to just start out by building a clinical code concept. I'm assuming that everybody's kind of familiar with the different types of concepts here. So clinical code, medication course, medication issue, diary concept, and rules based on existing concepts. This rule based on existing concepts can be really useful when you're starting to build out calculators or starting to build out custom calculations. So if we go into clinical code concept, and I'm going to put in, let's say we want to do a code of weight as an example, and then I'm just going to include just weight, and then I'm going to select the latest, and then you can add a custom result value. So this is something that a lot of people don't realize when they're looking at concepts. They just think concepts are simple pass-fail kind of checks against a particular code or against a particular value. You've of course got all the different elements that you can add in here in terms of time periods, numeric values, dates, episodes, result counts, and code lists. That gives you a massive amount of filtering. And then you've got the post filtering of the date, which then you can add the same elements to, which adds further complexity to it. You can link in other criteria, so you can add in other concepts to there as well. But then you can also, and this is the bit we're going to spend a bit of time looking at today, because this is the more complicated kind of side of concept building, is adding custom results. So the value returned by the concept is determined by the following logic. So your default would be the normal concept value, and the concept, if it fails a return, would be the normal concept value. But for the more complicated stuff, you might want to put in a fixed value. So for example, if you're looking at, you want to see how many drugs are patients on that are of a particular type, then you might write some concepts that check to see if they're on those particular drugs or not. And then if they are on those drugs, you might allocate that to the fixed value of 1. And then you could write another concept based on a concept that then adds up all of those values and then gives you a result. And then you could put that concept into some wiggly brackets, and then that would give you a score for that particular element. So that's one way of doing that kind of thing. So that's quite useful for putting in fixed values for calculators like 0 or 1, all those kind of things, isn't it, Jez?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly how the ACB calculator works. So if it finds a drug that's currently active on the patient record, and that drug would ordinarily contribute a score of 2 to the ACB score, then the fixed value that concept returns is 2. And then you use that as a building block with concepts for each and every drug with each and every score to build a total value, a total score. It's a really useful tool.
So then you can also, as well as using a fixed value, you can also do the result of a concept. So you can actually output a value of a different concept. So if you wanted to say, so if the weight is positive, you've added all those other filters, and then by the time you've added all of those other filters, if it passes, then you want to actually put in a value of a different concept as the custom output of this particular concept. So that's going to blow your mind a bit if you don't think about what you're doing. But that's, again, a really useful one if you're starting to think about how you want to construct calculations or how you want to construct kind of bits of information that you want to display to people in certain instances. So I'm trying to think of a use case for that, Jez. It might be something like if you've got a weight that's positive, you might want to actually display the latest BMI value, and you could put the BMI value in the concept, couldn't you?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so the concept identifies a certain parameter, but it's not that parameter you want to know about. It's the parameter returned by a different concept. So yeah, that's a good example. You've got something that identifies the latest weight, but then tells you the latest BMI.
So So that's quite a handy one. Or the other one that is really, really handy is the result of the calculation. So this one, you can add various different parameters. So you can add a code as a parameter. So you might want to put in weight as a parameter. So you can put that in and call it, just call it WT for weight. You might want to put in a concept value as a parameter within the calculation as well. So if I choose BMI calculator on latest values, I might want to put that in, put that BMI there. So I'm adding all the variables in here, and then what I can do is put an expression in, which then performs a calculation on those variables and gives me the output from that calculation. So that can get really quite snazzy, because you can start to do some really quite clever stuff when you start looking at the different expressions. So you can do stuff that's dead easy. So you could do equals like weight plus BMI, for example, or something like that. Or if we just pull back in our slides, you can use all of these different functions within there. So you can use cos, log, max, min, round, power, square, sin, and tan. So we're gonna dive into looking at some of those in a second. But the ones that we find particularly helpful are round, max, and min, because they allow you to kind of look at high or low values. So if we go into, actually, I'll just show you an example of that. If we dive into our 1COPD, where's that gone? There we go. So this gives you respiratory history. So this is one of our tools that we use for looking at oxygen sats, and you can see, look, we've got the latest oxygen sats here and what date that was, best ever oxygen sats here and what date that was, and then worst ever oxygen sats here and that date was, and the date of that as well. And they're all based on
critical at 4%, isn't it?
Yeah. It's definitely not very well that day. And those are all just based on those types of concepts and those types of outcomes. So that's pretty handy. So just going back to that list again, you've got all of those different variables, all those different calculations. So they're all SQL type of queries, but can be used within that calculation box in the bottom of the concepts. So click on custom value, have a bit of a play with all of those different things, because they can give you all sorts of different options for what you're up to. So the next bit was we were going to look at where you can actually get your wiggly brackets to work, because all of this work in terms of getting the concepts together is of little use if you can't actually display any of that information. So where can you display them? Well, first place is in protocols. So if we go to our protocol manager, and if we go to our PCIT webinar and open up there, and we'll open up a new protocol. So in here, you can, in an MCQ box, you can put in wiggly brackets. So if you put in a wiggly bracket there, and then you can select the concept that you want. So let's select, for example, that concept, and then let's look at the outputs from this. So what you can do with this is look at all of these different elements of information that you're going to pull from that concept. So some of those concepts we were just looking at creating, you can imagine you might want to pull a value from them and actually put that value. So for example, the highest ever oxygen saturations, we're going to use the value for that, because that's going to tell us what that number is. For some of them, we might actually want to do a count of how many of those codes exist. So for example, if you're looking at the number of exacerbations of COPD coded in the last 12 months, you might want to do a count. You've also then got to think, well, not only are they going to be coded as exacerbations, but you might have numbers of issues of steroids where they haven't actually been coded. So you might want to do that as well. Or you might also want to look at the fact that there is a code for the number of exacerbations within the last 12 months. And so you need to think about all of those different things if you're building that concept to actually display the true number of exacerbations for a patient. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in a muddle and display duff information to people. And I guess that is probably a good juncture for us to kind of carefully mention that all of this stuff, you need to be really, really careful about how you construct it, because the kind of information that you can be displaying to people can be quite important. And if you display the wrong information, that can also have quite a knock-on effect. So particularly if you're kind of using it in live clinical situations, you need to test the living daylights out of this stuff before you actually rely on it providing information for people. Because from an IT governance point of view, if you haven't done that, you're going to end up in trouble. And the last thing you want to do is cause problems for your patients. We're trying to make things easier and better for people rather than causing problems.
Exactly right. And it's worth saying that the testing process is in itself quite tricky. It's not uncommon to be in a testing environment where you're maybe using a resource that you've built and you're practicing it against some of your own patients that have got a lot of data in the record. But you need to be really careful about what point you say to your colleagues that this is now a live resource. And whilst you're testing, there are a few things that EMIS have put in to help you do that. So if we go right back to the concept builder there, Dustyn, you'll see that all concepts, if you build a concept, bearing in mind the concepts really are the driving force of some of these cooler things, there is the option to test run that single concept. When you do that, you'll find out what that concept does in detail. This panel will show you all the outputs, how it's weighed up the records, how it's weighed up what the what codes exist for that patient, and you can be absolutely certain before you even begin to use that concept that it's fit for purpose. So wherever you see that test run facility, in templates, in protocols, and especially in concepts, make good use of it before you start building.
I'd be very, very careful about testing all of your protocols and all of your concepts very, very thoroughly before you release them in a live environment, for the reason we've just said. So we're going to nip back over into the protocol builder, because I'm just going to show you all those different options so that we can talk about the wiggly bracket. So I'm going to pull in that one. So we've got count, which returns the number of those that are positive. You've got a date. So that would be useful if you're looking at like when a test was last done, for example. So the antibiotic used for UTI, you could put in a concept with the output of when the date of that was positive, and that will show you when those antibiotics were issued. You've got a date plus 3 months. If you wanted to fast forward something by 3 months, so that can be quite useful for things like demand monitoring, where you've got fixed periods of time to look at. You've got the term itself, so that'll actually output the term that's triggered the concept to be positive. You've got the value, which is the value of the output. You've got the is true, so if it's true, it will show you the name of the concept, which if you name your concepts, it can be useful. Jez and I were chatting about this morning. I mean, we've got a fairly structured way of naming concepts internally, because once you start creating huge numbers of concepts, it can be quite tricky to keep a track of exactly which concepts are doing which job, and also which resources those concepts are involved in. So some of our more complicated stuff, some of our concepts are reused across maybe 20, 30 different resources. And you make a change to one of those concepts and it then throws out those other 20 or 30 different resources. So keeping some kind of nomenclature that you understand, that you can then keep track of those resources through, is quite important. And you'll see a good example of that is all of the OBE stuff that we've just been looking at. So the obesity stuff, each of those is numbered, and then it's got a description of what they do after the naming nomenclature. So that's quite a safe way of building your protocols.
Having the reference number is very helpful to you as a builder.
You're breaking up a bit there, buddy. Just come back in.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's mine today, isn't it? Yes, having the reference number is very useful to you as the builder. But having a logical argument as part of the name of the concept is very useful, also to you as the builder, but also if you're going to return the name of that concept anywhere for users to understand what it's doing. So yeah, really good to have that sort of combined approach to building concepts.
Cool. So the other ones that you can have, so is false. So if that concept's false, then it will show you the name of the concept. That could be quite helpful as well. The really useful ones are is true custom text and is false custom text. So you'll see that. So if you've got, for example, you wanted to know if somebody has had like a weight done in the last, or hang on a second, if we look at one of the obesity ones. So if we say their BMI is, I was going to say if their BMI is high, yeah, there's not one of those, is there? But you could say like if their BMI was high, so you wrote a concept to check their BMI is over 25, and then you could put in the custom text some information, particularly about what you might want to do with that. So patients in this region are eligible for referral for weight management, for example, as a kind of bit of information for people in that bit of inverted commas there. So that can be quite handy. And then
you can put quite a lot of information in that free text, but you cannot put a full stop. So if you put a full stop in there, it will cause the whole thing to fall over. So loads of you can use loads of Unicode graphics and regular alphanumeric data, but no full stops. Yeah.
And there's a few peculiarities like that as well. I think, brackets can cause some funny shenanigans as well, I think. Then you've got extended details and you've got associated text. So that gives you a large amount of stuff that you can kind of add in. So this is one of the places that you can put that. You can put it in a multiple choice text there. So if we were to build out something in here, we might do, let's put, I'm just trying to think what we could do, Jez, as an example. We'll maybe show you that in a bit. Hang on a second. Let's do. I've recorded his weight today, so we could put his true custom text, and then I could put this chap's weight has been recorded today, and then that would be the information. You could put thanks as the option. So if you close that, stick that in there. Always put your end tab so that you know where you're going to. Test your protocol. He hasn't.
And we haven't recorded his weight. So you could say the opposite. If it is false, you could say this person's weight hasn't been recorded today, and for that patient, it would still give you that information. There you go. So his weight in.
I'll put in his weight, and then we'll rerun it. So let's put in 80 as an example, and go back to our protocol builder. Test run that. There we go. This chap's weight has been recorded today. Thanks. So job done. So that's one useful place you can put it. You can also put it in the concepts into protocol alerts. So if you've got an alert panel, hang on, we'll get rid of that because you can't have an MCQ and an alert panel in the same protocol, of course. So drop that in. So you call your alert name whatever you want to call it. So testing. So, and then in the display text, so this is the actual text that shows up in that box in the bottom right hand corner. You can either put in the alert that you want to have there, or you can put in wiggly brackets in there as well. So you could put in there is true custom text, and then put weight today, like that. And then the detailed message is what you get when you hover over it. So that's when you can put in a ton more information. So you could put in there all about what their weight increase has been, or what their weight decrease has been, or whether they've had a height recorded recently, and all of that kind of information. You put your alert priority. It's well worth noting if you put an alert priority as high, then it will pull through into things like meds management. So that's well worth knowing, because if you put as medium or low, it won't pull into memory for those. And then you can put it as a patient alert, diary alert, or both. So if we put it as a patient alert, put it as a clinical safety, these are just the different boxes that pop up next to the alerts in the bottom right hand corner. So they're different colors. So some of them are speech bubbles, some of them are yellow triangles, some of them are the red kind of dots. And then you can add the data using a library item. So if you want to take somebody off, if they hover over that alert, they see they've seen their display text, they've hovered over the detailed message, and they've got that information from the detailed message, and then you want them to then be able to put some data in or get even more information, such as the ACB calculator we showed you earlier on, then you can double click on that protocol alert in the bottom right hand corner, and it can take you to a library item. but it's got to be a library item. So if you've created a template, you'll need to save the page of the template that you want to take the user to as a library item. And a handy tip, I wouldn't necessarily save it after you've made it a library item. I would keep it as a template, create the library item, and then not save it, because then it gives you the flexibility to go back and edit it a lot more easily than if you create a library item out of it. That's just what we do when we're developing stuff, isn't it, Jess?
It's yeah, it is. It's a bit of an esoteric thing to explain over the voice. It might be something to show before we finish today, because that's library items are a complete pain, to be honest. They can be very useful. This is about the only place they're of any use over and above other sort of system tools. But to be able to use a library item off the little zap box by double clicking, which is what you're showing here, is very powerful. But actually deploying library items, building them, it can be a bit of a minefield. So yeah,
using them is a pain in the neck. So it's often much easier to keep the resource as a template until you've decided that it's at the stage that you're happy to release it. Then create the library item from it, but don't save the template, so that you've then got that template as the base resource to work off of.
Dustyn, can we just pause for a second there? I'd just like to double check, because we're not getting any particular responses from anybody who might be watching. I just want to be certain that that's all working okay. So if I could ask,
nobody, Jez.
We could be talking to ourselves. It's been done before. So could I ask, can we have anybody head over to the Twitter account, Primary Care IT, and just to send a reply to the Twitter feed for today's message, just so that I can see that we are definitely being received. Alternatively, use the Facebook account. There is a thread there.
We are recording this, Jez. So if folk are missing it, then we can always get it sorted out at a later stage.
Broadcast it later. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So I'm just going to. So if I test that. So you can see, there we go. There is my concept that I created there, and that's showing me in the bottom right-hand corner. I'm hovering over it, and there's nothing else there to show, but that's quite useful. So that's it in protocols. If we come out of there and go into templates and create a template, then we've got tons of places that we can also use the same wiggly brackets in template. So if you add a clinical code in here, so if we put in, we're sticking with the weight theme for today, but if we put in a clinical code of weight, you can add free text, and in the default free text, you can drop in your wiggly bracket. So you can pop in there and then put in the detail information there, and then that information is then shown. Let's just put that into history. And if we test that template, then it should be shown in the free text. I'm guessing once we, it's because we're testing it and because it's not saved, Jez, isn't it? It's not pulling through, but it's pulled through in a live template. If we just save and close that, just to show you exactly what I mean, and then we'll open up in Donald Duck, go away, and run that template. So PCIT webinar test.
Oh, hi, Sue. So Sue Gardner has responded, so that's great. Thank you, Sue. She specifically asked if some of the resources we've shown are available for use. So we'll come on to that just towards the end of the show.
Yeah, no problems. So I'm going to go back over to there. So we go back into body weight and click in there. Yeah, that's in there. Oh, it's because of BMI put in a concept that we're not actually looking for. So if I put in weight recorded today and then put in there is true custom text, weight was recorded today, and then click on that. And then if we test that, there we go, weight was recorded today. So it puts that text into the additional information in that box there. So
some EMIS users will have heard many years ago about the great EMIS revolution of something called smart templates. So the templates we're all using at the moment for the majority of the UK are what you might call dumb templates. And we were going to get some new smart templates which allowed you to return information from concepts and reorganize templates to look quite different and a little bit smarter. Well, we haven't actually had those, and we're still dealing with the sort of the old technology. But what Dustyn's just shown us here is a way of bringing out information from the record in a regular old template. So the fact that that concept can now report back to you when you load the template is actually quite clever, quite novel, and it's a bit of an unintended consequence of how EMIS designed this module many years ago. So we thought we'd make good use of it.
So again, we're just putting in a whole variety of different bits and pieces here. So I'll just type in here. Nice. There we go. Put that in.
We could also put the value in. We could put the value of that.
Yeah. So you can put in testing. Hey guys, hi everybody. Weight was recorded today, or we could, let's put in the value there, shall we? So if we put, go back into that default text. Let's just find BMI today or BMI recently. BMI value code set, that'll do us. If you haven't already spent some time looking at the EMIS library of concepts, I would suggest that that's, if you're like us, that's probably something worthy of your time. EMIS have got a huge number of concepts that they've built, not only for the kind of the alerts that they populate for drugs, and also for QOF, and for a variety of other different bits and pieces. And a lot of the time you'll find concepts there that you don't need to then go away and build yourself. So there you go, there's the BMI. Automatically put in there as a value if you want to do that. So they've got some really handy ones like date. So today's date. I think today's date is a concept that's really handy. Date of birth is another one, which is really handy. Ooh, I've got a date of birth. I have got a standardized date of birth somewhere. Date of birth. There you go. So that's in the EMIS library. So those are well worth having a bit of a look at and having a play with, because it'll save you time building them, and you don't have to worry about it then. So yeah, you've got predefined text that you can add you can add those concepts into. You can also do it in code pick lists. So you can drop in your code picks, have your prompt there, and then also have free text in the prompt for the code pick list. Same for code browser, same for tick pick list, and same for value pick list, and also for yes no prompt, and also for annotation as well. So annotation you can actually add in the free text in there if you want to as well. So all of those things can be quite useful. So that's kind of where you can get the information out to people. Then you've got to think, okay, so how do we actually get those things embedded? So we've shown you some of the different tools that you think of, but you've got to think, okay, so if I want to put it into a protocol, then think about that protocol has got various different triggers, and so you might think, right, I've got to think about what it is that I'm actually trying to achieve with my build here. So when do I want this to be launched manually? And in our experience, the vast majority of tools that you launch manually don't get used unless people have been given a significant amount of time in training. And equally, if you have lots and lots of tools that auto pop up, that tends to really annoy people. So there's a balance to be had between kind of popping up when it's needed, but not popping up too frequently. That actually is a pain in the neck. And when you look at the number of different triggers that you've got, they're huge. So you've got things like add a code, add a consultation, add a drug, add a proxy user, administration of a hospital drug, book an appointment, cancel a drug issue, etc., etc. So when you're building your protocol, just think really carefully about what it actually is that you're trying to achieve. What's the end result that you want to get for somebody? And then think, okay, so how am I best to do that? When would I want it to trigger? How would I want it to trigger? For whom would I want it to trigger? And then think, how can I get that information on screen? Do I want it in a protocol alert box? Do I want it in an MCQ box that then has a defined outcome? Do I want it in kind of just a pop-up that pops up on the screen? Or do I want it to come up when people book appointments? How do I want to get that information across to people? And that's probably the most important thing about thinking about how to build things. So we're thinking
Yeah,
about.
I think it's definitely worth, particularly with the complicated stuff. But actually, it's even very useful with the really simple protocols. Is to literally draw it out, get yourself a Sharpie and a big piece of white paper, and wireframe what it is you're trying to achieve. Start with a very simple question, and keep reflecting back on that, and build it that way. And the nice thing about the way EMIS have put a lot of these things together is it does follow, protocols particularly do follow that sort of logical flowchart approach. So yeah, definitely recommended doing that.
Yeah. So what we thought we'd do is run through this EMIS protocol that has been developed. So the way it works is if you put in a weight. So let's just come away from that. So if I put in a weight today of 86, it pops through and it's auto calculated the BMI for me. Now, if I go into the protocol, I don't think that one's actually triggered. If we test run that, it actually usually gives you an awful lot more information than that. So let's just go back in. Why has it done that, Jez?
Has this particular weight monitoring code gone into the record today already?
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, that's why, because we've already done it. So that's part of the build, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yes, it is. And in fact,
weight monitoring. Yeah.
Loads of it's gone in. So let me just try it on a different patient. So that's
what
part.
Actually just happened is it's actually a feature of this particular protocol, and Dustyn's already mentioned about the issues around things appearing on the screen, popping up, and causing a lot of distress to your users. So pop-up fatigue is something you need to think about. Well, there is a way of designing a protocol using a concept where the protocol leaves a footprint in the record every time it's been run. And in this case, the footprint is a very appropriate code. The code they've used here is weight monitoring. So the heart of the protocol is a concept that looks to see if weight monitoring as a code has landed in this person's records already today. And if it has, the protocol stops and the user never even realizes that it's run. So you don't get the same protocol happening 10, 15, 20 times a day. So it's a very neat little trick.
Yeah, it's one that we commonly build into our protocols, Jez, isn't it? Because it's just to stop stuff from duplicate running. So because we haven't run it on this patient today, because we haven't been goofing around with it earlier this morning like we were with Donald, you can see I've put in his weight, and then look, it's calculated my BMI for me, which is quite nice. It's also told me that 80 kilograms equates to 12 stone 8, which is a 14% gain from the previous reading, which was on the 27th of September 2019. Based on the height entry, which was put in on the 8th of July 2019, a healthy weight is likely to be anywhere from 49 to 66 kilograms, which is 7 stone 10 pounds to 10 stone 6 pounds. And then the BMI has been re-added there, and it's based on the height entry. And it's just making a note that prior to the age of 70, average height loss is 1 centimetre per 10 years. So it's just giving me a nudge to remind me that I need to consider that when I'm thinking about interpreting the BMI. So if we were thinking about, so that's the output that we've got, which is what the EMIS guys have really helpfully built for us, which is really useful. So if we were sort of starting from scratch, this is the kind of notes that I might be making about this. I'd to sort of say to myself, look, this is the kind of variables that I want to take into account. And I think, like Jez says, it's really important to kind of sketch this out, think this out, and think about all of your unintended consequences with these types of protocols, because the number of times in the early days of building protocols that I used to get earache from my colleagues because there was stuff popping up all over the place that was driving them nuts that shouldn't have been. And all of that can be avoided very, very easily by making sure that you think things through carefully and test them while you're building them, rather than get overly excited about getting something out and then get it out with loads of errors and omissions. And I think if you're going to maintain the confidence of your colleagues whilst you're going through this kind of testing period, doing the latter rather than the former is definitely a very sensible thing to do. So we're looking at this and I'm thinking, right, I'd only ever want to run this protocol on somebody who's over the age of 18, because under the age of 18, I don't really want to be getting into the peculiarities of BMI calculating. That's just too complex for the brief that we're going. I want to have checked that this patient's definitely had a height recorded, because if they haven't had a height recorded, then I can't calculate a BMI. I'm also having a bit of a thinking, when was that height recorded, and were they over the age of 18 at the stage that that height was recorded? Because that's also something that we need to consider from a kind of safety point of view. I wanted to trigger when the weight is inputted, but only if a value is put in at the time, and only once per day. I don't want it to trigger multiple times. So that was what we saw with Donald Duck earlier on. That's been built into that protocol to achieve that. If there are previous weights, then ideally I want to calculate a percentage increase or decrease. That might be nice. And then if the BMI is over 20, then I probably want the ideal weight to be shown. And then I want to auto document the BMI, but also warn the user of the date that the height was put in, and the fact that the height decreases with age, especially over the age of 70. So that's my kind of starter for 10 in terms of thinking about the protocol. And so I'm thinking, right, I've got to build quite a lot of concepts to figure that stuff out. So let's just start off with the easy stuff. So we'll say, right, let's just, if we put that next to EMIS, and then we can hopefully pull up the protocol at the same time as having the notes up, so that we can see what we're up to. So if I pull EMIS in, I'm just going to drag that to this size, and then hopefully we can keep both windows available for seeing. There we go, that's working reasonably well, isn't it? So if we go into our obesity protocol, so here we go. So age 18 or over, that's a national concept. That's not one you need to build yourself. You just want to find that one yourself. So if you're ever looking for age, just type in age into the concept searcher, and there's tons of them. Sometimes with EMIS, when you press return the first time, this is grayed out and it doesn't let you go to the next page. So if you click a second time, and then you can always then go to the future pages of all the different ages and look at them. There's hundreds of them. So you're always going to be able to find the age that you want there. Second one, got to have the height recorded. Okay, we've got the concept there, height recorded, so that's good. I think if I was probably building this again, I might say height recorded over the age of 18, and actually build a concept that double checked that that height was recorded after the age of 18. Jez, I don't know what you think. Jez is gone. Fine, no problems. So then weight recorded today is the next concept.
I'm still here. I am.
You are still here. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, mate. Yeah, I think that is right. I also think that with the height recorded, if there is never a height in the record, then this protocol appears to end. It's not uncommon when you're doing somebody's BMI to weigh them and then think, oh, I need the height now to do the BMI and do the height second. So you really want for this protocol to return the correct output, to do their height first and then enter their weight second. So you could have a little nudge there to say that the height is false. Maybe you want to record their height before you run this protocol.
Yeah, or if it's been more than 5 years since they last had their weight, their height recorded, then you might put it in a nudge. But all of these things are balancing up the kind of the user's irritability versus the kind of the purism of actually achieving exactly what you want to achieve, because most clinical scenarios are so complex and multifaceted that actually you can't account for absolutely every eventuality, and if you try to, you're just going to annoy people by having far too many pop-ups that then become more of a risk in themselves. So you've got to take a kind of moderated approach, and I think this is probably a reasonable kind of moderated path through from that kind of point of view. So then we're looking and saying, okay, so has their weight already been added today? So this is looking further on in our protocol. We're spotting that every single pathway through this protocol has got a weight monitoring code added to it, and what this concept is doing is saying, if that's already been done, so this protocol has already been run today with the weight monitoring, stop. And that's why it didn't run for a second time on Donald Duck when we ran through it, because it was just running straight to this end here. And and that's quite an important thing to do, because and ideally you want to put that as early in the protocol as you possibly can, because otherwise your protocol can end up running through multiple different times on the same day and then ending in end every time, which can slow down your EMIS a little bit. So try and put those in fairly early on in your protocol construction, and that should help. You then got latest weight added prior to date. So if there has been a weight added before today, then that's going to go down that route. If they haven't had a weight calculated today, then it can't calculate the percentage increase or percentage decrease. So that's why it's splitting it out at that stage, because the free text, or the text that we've added in here in the wiggly brackets, is talking about percentage increase and percentage decrease in weight, and we can't do percentage increase and percentage decrease in weight if there hasn't been a previous weight added. So we've accounted for the fact that we wanted to do that. So this element of the protocol build here, we've filtered out those patients who haven't had a previous weight so that we can deal with them separately. And then for those patients who have had a weight added previously, we're then looking at whether their BMI is less than 20 or more than 20. And if it's more than 20, then we're going to show them even more information with the weight shown. So that then drops us through to the weight monitoring. This is where we get the really clever bit. So this is all the free text that's in that box. So this.
Should we copy that out to?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, I've got it in here. So,
yes, yeah.
That's that there. So this box has got the most text of any of those boxes within the protocol within it. And it's often worth building your most complicated one first, so that you've got all of the text in this one. And then once you've built your most complicated one that's got all of the text in it, then you can cut out the bits and delete that. You can copy that text and then delete it from these other nodes, so that you're not having to kind of build that one, then build a bit more, then build a bit more. Just build the biggest one to start off with, and just delete the bits that aren't relevant for the other nodes in this particular area. This one's pretty easy because you've only got 4 different options. Some of them, I think, our biggest one, I think we had 126 different options that chucked out.
Yeah.
And then Jez and I figured out a way to do it through concepts that got rid of all of them, which really pleased people, didn't it, Jez?
Yeah.
that was the bloods monitoring one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it works.
Yeah. So that's probably the way we'd do that. So, and looking at, that's the text that's in that box, and so what I'm going to do is go back and say, like, this is how we often construct the text. So looking at that, I get word blindness with this kind of stuff. It just looks like a bunch of mess for me. So the way that I tend to write out this kind of stuff, if I'm thinking about text that I want to put as information for people, is to put current weight, and then I put in stars, and I put what I want to be in there. So I'm putting weight value, because that's what I want to be in there. So I know that that's got to be a concept. The stuff in there, it's got to be a concept, yeah. And then that's kilograms, and it equates to, and then I'm putting stars, calculated value in stones, and then stone after it, and then calculated value in pounds after it, and those two are concepts, yeah. Then I'm putting in that is again within a concept, so the 2 stars, a percentage change in weight, and then if it's increased, show gain from. So that's your if true, then custom text. And then if decreased, show loss from. So that's if true, custom text. And then put in the last weight and the date, again in the stars. So that's a concept that's going to show me that. Based on the height entry, which is just free text, last height and the date of the last height, and a healthy weight is likely to be, and then I'm going to put in another concept here, which is the weight based on a BMI of 18 for height, and then a weight based on a BMI of 25 for height, and then I'm going to calculate all of that in stone again. So what that looks like in concepts is that. So what we're saying there is current weight is equal to the weight recorded today value. So that's a nice easy concept, dead easy. But then that equates to a weight in stone value. So how do we get there? So let's have a look back. This is going back to some of the principles that we were talking about earlier in concept construction. So if I go back to OBE 007, and that's a weight in stone. And that concept is looking at the concept in stone decimal is true. So I need to understand what that is first. So let's open that.
And that's a neat little trick Dustyn's just shown us there, which is the ability to drill down through different concepts.
Yeah.
So
if you didn't spot me doing,
yeah, go ahead.
Highlighted the concept. So the OBE for weight in stone decimal PCIT is true. Open selected. That takes me into that concept, and you can see they're in tabs across the top here. So you've got that one and you've got that one. So this concept is giving me the body weight. It's selecting the latest, checking again that it's body weight, and then it's doing, if it's passing, then it's doing the result of the calculation, which is the weight in kilograms divided by 6.35, which is your calculation to get your stone. Yeah. And then if the concept value fails, then return the value 0. So that will give me a number, but a number that has got a whole load of decimal points after it, because it's dividing something by 6.350293118. So that's just going to give me that. So if I want to know about the stone, what I've got to do is actually round that. So what this concept is doing is a concept based on a concept. It's checking that that concept is true, and then it's taking the value of that and it's rounding it. So it's using one of these expressions, SQL expressions that we talked about. It's rounding it to decimal minus 0.4999999, and it's rounding it to 0 decimal places. Yeah.
So now that's quite clever, really. But what it's doing is you're taking 0.49999 recurring, so just less than half off the value that you've got. So if you're 12.9 stone, it will take you 4 stone, 4 and a bit stone, and then it'll round you down to 12. If you're 12.3 stone,
you just cut out for a fraction of a second there, Jez, in the key bit.
Okay.
Just start that bit again.
Okay.
So what they've called the weight in stone in decimal, they've called decimal. So that's where you're seeing this decimal in this calculation. So they're taking your weight in kilograms converted to stone. They're calling that decimal, and then they're taking that value, taking 0.4999 off of it, which is what Jez was just explaining why. So just run through that bit again, Jez.
Yeah, so if you're just over 12 stone, it'll take you to just over 11.5 stone. If you're just under 13 stone, it'll take you to just over 12.5 stone. Then it's going to round you to the nearest whole number, which either way around lands you on a round number of 12. So it's a clever way of taking off just less than half the decimal, and then you will round. So it takes you to where you want to be. I only want to know in the whole number of stone for this person. Yeah.
And that 0 is the number of decimal places. So if you wanted it to a decimal place of 2, then you'd like a BMI, then you'd put 2 there. So it just gives you that information. So that has now given me, all of that work has given me my weight in pounds. Sorry, my weight in stone, not my weight in pounds. My weight in stone as a value that I can now put into this particular protocol. So if we, I've resized that again, which was a bit of a mistake. Let me just drop that back over onto that screen again. And if we make that a bit smaller and then drop it there. So we've now got to work out what the weight in pounds is. So that is OBE 006. So I don't think we've pulled that one through. Okay, so we need to pull that one through and have a bit of a look at that one, but that would be a similar kind of concept to the way that you've done the weight in stone. Then if we're looking at percentage weight change, we're looking at a concept called OBE 13. So that is percentage.
It's definitely best done in kilograms.
Yeah, definitely. So it's checking that you've got the weight recorded and that's true, and then that's them triggering the concept to be correct. If the concept is correct, what it's then looking at is your latest weight added prior to today, so not today's weight, but the previous weight, and then it's also adding in the variable of today's weight. And then what it's doing is, so look at the stuff in the brackets first before you look at the round, and then you'll understand what's going on in here. So you've got the latest weight divided by the previous weight. You're then timesing that by 100. Then you're taking off 100, which gives you your percentage. And then you're rounding that down to a whole number. So that then gives you your percentage, and that's what's happening there.
In fact, with that one, you're rounding it down or up. So wherever it lands between the two big values, between 11 and 12%, for example, it will round up to 12 or down to 11.
Yeah, and the other thing that's going to happen is if it's a weight loss, it's going to be a negative number. If it's a weight gain, it's going to be a positive number. So that's the other element that's going to happen in there. So that's quite helpful. And if you run test run on that, then you can see that's going to give me a value of 14%, because the previous weight was 70, today's weight is 80, and so it's increased by 14%. And you can see the calculation that's occurred there. It runs through and tells you all the different bits and pieces there in terms of the detail. So that's quite helpful to kind of see.
It definitely highlights the value of hitting test run on a particularly a more complicated concept.
Yeah. And then heading on from that, you've got the weight has increased since last reading concept, or weight has reduced since the last reading concept. So if we look at those, so weight has increased, what that's doing is looking at percentage weight changes true, and then it's checking to see whether that value is at least 0. So that would be an increase, and then the weight decrease would be a value of less than 0, I'm guessing. Yeah, a value is less than 0. So that then gives you your free text of gain from or loss from the previous reading. And then you've got the latest weight added prior to today at the date, so that gives you the date of the previous reading. You've then got based on the height entry, and then it's got the date of the height entry. A healthy weight is likely to be, and then this is then back calculating from your height what for a BMI of 18 what your weight would be. So if we go to 18, or hang on, got 18 or 8 or 20, there's 8, that'll do us. So if we open that one, that's your calculation to achieve that. So you've got a concept that checks that today's height, the height has been recorded. You've then got within the custom calculation at the end of that concept, you've got a variable called height, and then what it's doing is taking the height divided by 100 times by the height divided by 100, because remember your height's in centimeters, so it's converting it to meters. It's timesing the two, so it's basically undoing your BMI calculation, isn't it? And then rounding it so that you've got your calculated weight. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Just to me, we're not getting any questions in about it, so I'm guessing everyone's got it. Okay, it's definitely something to go over again and again, because these are some of the more complicated concepts, and using these calculators are definitely one of the more powerful and complex sort of deployments.
Yeah. So then you got your calculated weight for BMI. So that was, if you remember when we went back to Catherine Wheel, it told us a weight range, didn't it? So if you remember, it said somewhere between 49 and 66. Well, that's basically giving us her value of a weight for her height if her BMI was 18, and her weight for her height if her BMI was 25. So that's what those two things are doing. And then it's also then telling us what those are in stones and pound, and that will just be the same concept calculation that we did for the earlier thing that converted the average weight to that. So if we go back to our protocol, once you've built that lengthy text there, all of that is all of that, and it's all been built, and you're done. And then you can just copy and paste that. So if you copy that, Control and C, and then drop that into this one, and then this one you don't want, because the BMI is over 20, you probably don't want to include some of the other detail there, so you just delete that off. And this one, because there isn't a previous weight, then you're going to want to delete off some of the other information and put that in there. And then away you go. For this branch, you're then further calculating the BMI. It's just checking what age you are and when the height was entered with these concepts, which is what we were talking about before. And then it's adding a BMI code, and then also highlighting about the weight loss. So that was the other bit. And then the trigger for this protocol is when you add the code weight, and then it stops, as we said before, any of these codes being entered, the weight monitoring codes then stops it from re-triggering, and so that tidies that up. So that's really our kind of build complete from that point of view of that one. So I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been easy enough to follow. It has, I mean, as we said, this was for complicated concepts and protocols. We are going to do a separate session for kind of starting out with protocols and concepts and templates, which might be more use if this has been a bit complicated for you. But I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, nice to see you guys.
Well, take care, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye for now.